Another day, another vlog. Something, G company. If I hold this like here, is this working for anybody? Does this look convincing? That's Gymspiration for another couple months. Oh my god, hey! Welcome back to another review video on my Stagey YouTube channel. If you are meeting me for the first time, hello! My name is Mickey Joe and I am obsessed with all things theatre, which is why I have this Stagey YouTube channel. Here is where I post reviews of shows I have been invited to go and see in London and in the UK, and I talk about theatre, news and gossip and drama and goings-on happening all around the world. If either or both of those things sound like content that you might be interested in seeing on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you have a Stagey friend, send me to them. At the time of filming this, I am painfully close to 40,000 subscribers, which is very cool. And, you know, that would be nice. And if nothing else, I love a round number. So today, I am here to talk to you about the new production of From Here to Eternity. This is the musical version by Stuart Brayson and Sir Tim Rice, and is based on the classic film. It originally appeared as a musical at the Shaftesbury Theatre in the West End a number of years ago, and this is its first major London revival since. It's happening at the Charing Cross, a considerably smaller venue. It's being staged in Traverse. I'll talk more about what that means later, but it has also undergone significant changes and rewrites and restructuring, and there are new songs, so lots of differences between this one and the original production. Now, I never saw the original production live, but they did film it for posterity, so I have watched that professional recording multiple times. If you were lucky enough to see the original production of From Here to Eternity in the theatre, let us know what you thought of it in the comments section down below. But in any case, this new production is what we are here to talk about. It has just opened at the Charing Cross Theatre, and I'm going to be letting you know all of my thoughts in today's video. But before I do, if you haven't already, make sure you've subscribed to my Stagey YouTube channel. If you really enjoyed today's video, you can use the super thanks button somewhere below my face down here to give me a tip. That really helps me as a Stagey content creator to make more videos just like this on a very regular basis. Also, you can go and find me on other social media platforms. I am at Mickey Joe Theatre on Instagram, Twitter, and what's the other one? TikTok. I'm now on TikTok. Legitimately forgot that for a second. Finally, if you want to make sure you're keeping up with all of the reviews that I have written, as well as the ones that appear in videos here on YouTube, use the link down below to make an account with ShowScore. It's completely free, and if you use the link down below, you'll be signed up to immediately and automatically follow all of the reviews of mine that get posted on that website. They're all collated in one place, no matter which website I'm reviewing for, whether that's What's on Stage or Broadway World or my own site. And you can also review shows for yourself. Now, finally, let's talk about From Here to Eternity. Feels like I've been talking for eternity. That's because I have. So this is the first thing I really want to address, is the changes made to the original production, because we knew this was going to happen for various reasons. Not least of all because the creatives had mentioned that they were making changes. The original production was famously short-lived. It flopped essentially at the Shaftesbury Theatre, despite having established a sort of an unexpectedly devoted young fan base. And I think the general consensus was that this show had marketed itself to the wrong audience. They were going for the more classic South Pacific-esque vibe with an older audience based on this classic romantic film, and the people who ended up engaging more with the material were young people, and a lot of people who were in drama school at the time developed this real fondness and this real love for the musical version of From Here to Eternity. But for whatever reason, the show never really caught on in its original run, so they have made some changes to this version. To begin with, there is just a lot of restructuring of the plot, and the most glaring thing for me is that the show follows these two different romantic relationships in parallel. A younger soldier who has just joined G Company named Pruitt. He falls in love with a local girl in Hawaii who is working as a prostitute. Her name is Lorene, and then simultaneously a sergeant working underneath the captain's company falls in love with that captain's wife and conducts an affair behind his back. Now, in the original version, we saw both of these couples meet, fall unexpectedly in love, and we saw the arc of both of their relationships in the days leading up to Pearl Harbor. The show actually began with the two women on a boat sailing away from Hawaii, meeting for the first time and discussing loosely what they had just experienced. Not only does that scene between them no longer open the show and no longer take place whatsoever, but critically, we do not see these two couples meet. In this new version of the show, the affair is already taking place by the time we meet the older couple, and the younger couple have already met previously, or Pruitt at least already has this fascination with Lorene. And this is a strange choice that on the face of it seems to distance the show from being about romance, from being about these relationships, and it's making it more about the tragedy of Pearl Harbor and life within this company at this frustrating time when nothing much was really happening during the Second World War, prior to Pearl Harbor when everything started happening. But in place of these romantic scenes, we just have more time spent at the barracks, more time spent with the soldiers and their internal politics, and more to do with this unending boxing championship. So the captain wants Pruitt to fight for that particular company's boxing team so that they can win the boxing championship, because that will help him advance in his career. And Pruitt has some sort of dark dramatic backstory that means he does not want to because he made a deathbed promise to his mother. It's all this strange little convoluted thing, and that is normally a little subplot that happens in the background of the main romantic arcs of the story. But the story now is really without these main romantic arcs, so it does completely shift what it is that we're watching. Now, From Here to Eternity is a famous romantic film. Yes, it's about Pearl Harbor, but to my knowledge, it's best understood as the film where Deborah Kerr and that other guy, who was also very important, but I forget his name right now, they make love in the ocean. That's what this film is remembered for. That's the iconic scene. That used to be the end of Act 1 in the original production when they sang a song called More Than America, which has some of Tim Rice's greatest lyrics. It has some wonderful analogies where they're talking about their relationship and their perspectives on the army and the war and the country, and then you have the soldiers' interpretation of that as well. It's a lovely, stirring choral song that is just cut completely from this production. Not only do they not bang in the ocean, they don't sing a song about it. And there's more that has been cut from this production as well. So one of the biggest changes is that the original had a whole female ensemble. They predominantly played other prostitutes in the bar where Lorene was working, and in this version we only meet Mrs. Kipfer, who runs the establishment, and Lorene. We don't see any of the other girls, and we have no female ensemble. We have 3 female parts within the cast, and no ensemble whatsoever. So they do a whole number when the boys first arrive at the bar. Don't you like Hawaii? Gone. Cut. Dead. Completely. That was the scene where Pruitt and Lorene met for the first time. Very Chris and Kim in Miss Saigon. And so this, I think, has been cut purely due to logistics. It was one of the few moments of levity and lightness in an otherwise fairly heavy-going army story. But also, I wonder if they've made an attempt, because narratives like this have come into question and come under a certain amount of criticism and fire. Haha, army pun. For romanticizing the soldiers visiting this area and conducting relationships with younger native women. I think the whole white savior complex idea of Miss Saigon, there are similarities with this particular romantic storyline here. And certainly a lot of the prostitution scenes we see in this one are very much more bleak. It's not a romantic cabaret-style dance. It's not showing the girls as having a great time and enjoying themselves. It is a brutal reality in which Lorene is on a bed and there is a queue of men in various states of undress waiting to spend a short amount of time with her. The captain's wife, whose name is Karen, she used to have a different song in the first act called Another Language, and she now sings a song called, excuse me while I find it for you, More to Life Than This. More to Life Than This is the song that she now sings. It articulates many of the same ideas, but it's a different song to the one in the original. I don't mourn the loss of that song as much as I do some of the others. And the other difference I need to tell you with the musical numbers is that there are 2 songs that both used to be in the first act, Fight the Fight, which is maybe one of the best songs in the original score, and Run Along Joe, which was sung by Lorene. Both of those now take place in the second act. This has consequences, and I'm going to tell you more about them in the next section. So, those have been some, but not all of the changes made to the show. There are other little structural moving arounds of different things. I'm going to tell you what I actually thought of it now. So it's because of all of these changes that I really struggled with the show. And I don't think this is just me being precious about the original. I never saw the original production live. Going into this show the other night, I didn't have that strong a recollection of the original. It's not a production I was ever completely devoted to, but a lot of the more iconic moments and the things I did remember about it were conspicuously absent from this production. And as sad as I am to say it, I think a lot of the changes they've made specifically to the score and the rearrangement and the cuttings of the score, I think have really harmed and impaired this production. I cannot begin to work out why they have stifled both of these romantic narratives by robbing us of the moment that they meet. The moment that the two older characters begin about having an affair, they used to have so many scenes. There was so much dialogue where they were coming to understand each other as characters. They had different misconceptions of each other, and then they finally found this common ground, and then they banged in the ocean. It was a whole moment. And we don't get any of that in this one. We just get them in this awkward affair, and you're not quite sure if they're both completely in it emotionally or if she's just using him for a ticket off of the island. It's never really clear because we don't see the moments where they're coming together and the moments where they're letting their guard down. We just see them already meeting in this sort of strange embrace. I mean that metaphorically, but they do also literally embrace. And for Lorene and Pruitt, I think it's critically flawed that we don't show them meeting, because in the original version, you know, she's flirtatious with him, she's suggestive to him, they meet in the club in this setting where they are supposed to meet, and the whole thing has been engineered. It's very Kim and Kristen Miss Saigon, like I'd already said before. But what happens is, because of the way that he behaves differently towards her than a lot of the other soldiers, she starts to get more emotionally involved in the relationship than perhaps she ought to, than perhaps she would usually let herself. And she then sings the song Run Along Joe, where she is reluctant to fall in love and she is trying to push him away. She is telling him to leave, even though she doesn't want him to leave, because she fears that if he stays, she's going to fall in love with him. And Tim Rice writes such a beautiful lyric. And not only has that song been moved to the second act, but we don't actually see them meet. So the problem in this new version of the show is the relationship never feels completely consensual. We know that he's devoted to her, he sings about her. We don't see him have that moment of, oh my gosh, seeing her for the first time and love at first sight. We just hear him saying her name over and over, and it just sounds like any other soldier who's become obsessed with a local prostitute. And she doesn't seem overwhelmingly happy to see him when he first goes to her. She's like, oh, you're the one I kind of like, you're nice enough. So I never buy into them having this rapturous love, and that's so important for this story. Now, the song Run Along Joe, this has been moved to the second act. She now sings it in a completely different context, where Mrs. Kipfer has banned her from seeing him, and that's when she sings the song. But the problem is, where other lyricists would write you a generic I am sad song, Sir Tim Rice writes such a specific lyric that so beautifully explicates her feelings about wanting to push him away because she's worried if she lets him come too close, she's going to fall in love with him. But those are now not the circumstances. So she sings the same lyrics in a completely different situation, and it doesn't make any sense. She's singing Run Along Joe all the while he is desperately trying to make contact with her, but he is being stopped by Mrs. Kipfer. She wants Mrs. Kipfer to let him in, but she's not going to. So telling him to run away isn't helping anyone, and it's not really responding to the situation that they're in. Fight the Fight has been similarly kneecapped because it used to happen in the first act. There was a beautiful bit of staging happening behind it, and Pruitt was in the barracks with everyone else, and he was singing the song about he wasn't going to get involved and he wasn't going to fight because of various things that we find out later in the plot, and he was going to be true to himself and he wasn't going to do what everyone told him. And in the background behind him is a slow motion fight sequence happening, this brawl with a lot of the other soldiers in the company. He now sings it in the second act, but the trouble is he spent so much of the first act saying he's not going to fight, he has his principles, that by the time he sings it in the second act, it's like, yes, we get it. It reminded me of Amelie, where they moved Times Are Hard for Dreamers to the second act, and it's nothing we don't already know by that point in the show. It's very late for that character to be singing an I Want song. For Amelie, I get it to a certain extent because it's not until the second act that she really discovers what she wants. But Pruitt has his principles from the beginning, so why not just sing that song nearer to where we first meet him? Like I said, some of these changes I can understand, some of them I do not begin to. So this, for me, on balance, was a 3-star production. There are still some very strong moments, there are still some incredibly emotive moments, but some of the best things linger from the original production, and a lot of the newer moments fell a little flat. There are some great scenes that cut through and still have this big emotional impact, like when the Pearl Harbor attacks begin and they sing The Boys of 41. It's this haunting, ethereal song that the 3 female members of the cast sing. Now, it used to be the whole female ensemble, and you had this wall of choral sound as they slowly walked across the back of the stage while holding hands. A striking visual. In this version, you only have the 3 of them. And when you downsize from a big West End production in a big West End house to the Charing Cross Theatre, which is a very small, intimate space. Like I said before, it's staged in traverse. That means the stage is in the middle, and you have audiences looking on from both sides. So if I look past the stage, I'd see the audience on the other side also watching. When you downsize a show like that, you have to make changes. And I understand they're not going to have the same size of ensemble. It's not going to have the same huge sound. But you have to make decisions about how to do that smartly. Going from this big chorus to 3 people trying to achieve the same effect is simply not going to work. Had they done it as a solo number sung by one individual, broken, heartfelt voice, give it to Desmonda Cathabel, the actress who was playing Loreen, who has a beautiful voice, perfect for delivering a torch song, let her walk slowly through the chaos of the stage while all of this destruction and slow motion death is happening, and I think that would have been possibly a little more stirring and a little more striking in that space. But then that whole scene, for all of the pathos and the brilliance of that musical overlay, has no consequences, because we never find out that any of those characters died. Unless I missed something massively, they all reappear again, and we see them all mobilizing to fight again. Why waste all of that time and that staging and that core strength slowly falling over boxes just to be fine afterwards? That made no sense to me. And undercut the emotional impact. What we've just seen isn't nearly as important as what we thought it was. Like I'd mentioned before, some of the scenes in the bar were the only sources of levity for this show. Without them, we had very little levity. The whole thing felt very heavy, very bleak. It didn't really feel like we were in Hawaii because of this staging, and the visuals were all just very cold and very stark. You had these boxes on stage. Now, because it was in traverse, you couldn't do much without obstructing sight lines, although there was still some very uninventive direction on that stage that managed to block both people's faces for all audience members during important scenes. That, to me, was a mistake. And too often people were in the middle of the stage when really, if you're in the round, your most powerful places are the corners, but that's by the by. No, the whole thing felt very bare, very desolate, which perhaps is what they were going for. Perhaps they wanted it to feel more like how the men are interpreting Hawaii. Rather than this lush paradise, it's this place of frustrating boredom. But then you also don't want your audience to be frustrated and bored. Also, and this is a completely random note, but I really wish that they didn't use headset microphones. So rather than using a microphone on the end of a cable that goes through your hair and gets taped here like most big West End shows, they were using mics on headsets like Amdram companies use, and occasionally other professional productions. But you have a little headset that sits over your ears with a microphone on a little wire sticking forwards. Pruitt's got dislodged at one point and it was sticking in his neck, and we had a whole host of sound issues as a result of that. He did manage to get it back on. And Eve Polycarpou, an actress who I haven't mentioned yet, who is fantastic, but she has the loudest jewellery in the world. And just like you'd hear it if I was wearing a very loud necklace and loud earrings near this microphone, we heard it throughout one really important second act scene on the stage. And it was very difficult to focus on the gravitas of what was perhaps her most serious and most important scene, because where it was meant to be this confrontation between her and Loreen, it suddenly became a 3-person scene because her earrings also wanted to be involved. Now, this isn't to say that I didn't enjoy any of it. There was one particular piece of staging I thought was brilliantly clever, and it was when they were having a little meeting about some of the soldiers having been busted by local police at a known queer residence. And they're conducting a little internal investigation, and we find this out in a very different way to how we did in the original. In the original, we see them going in and we know why they're there before they get busted. In this version, we find out when they're getting busted by the police, and then it flashes back to those scenes. And the way that's staged is brilliant and slick, and I liked that very much. But it did just make me frustrated that we didn't have more of that genius throughout the rest of the production. So even though I was disappointed by this show, there were some objectively very good performances. Before I pick out the highlights, I think a lot of them in general were a bit static and a bit one note. But I don't know how much of this could also be attributed to the changes in the material and how much could be attributed perhaps to the direction, because if it's a general note I have for most of them, you would assume that perhaps is coming from a creative decision instead. But it felt as though Pruitt and Warden, who are our two leading men, were both kind of unchanging in their demeanour throughout. They were quite stoic and morose, and I would have loved to have seen their respective relationships bring out something more in them other than this brooding, principled frustration. No one had an arc. I just wanted an arc. And the women were the same for the most part. Karen, who was played by Carly Stenson, she was just kind of wry and sarcastic and emotionally unavailable the entire time. And Desmond Cathabel, who was playing Lorene, who I think is a huge rising star, especially when she sings. Like I said, I never really bought into her complete emotional involvement in that relationship. It felt like she was just sort of surviving and coping, and I needed to see more contrast between her demeanour when she's with Pruitt and otherwise. Also, one specific note for something she did at the end of the performance, and this is a spoiler alert if I haven't dropped enough already. She gets handed a flag to signify that she is finding out that Pruitt has died. She begins having this hysterical emotional reaction, and then a second later, she's giving you, like, so overwhelmed that she can't even begin to process it, and giving that staring into the distance, just despair thing. Now, I feel like as an actor, you have to choose one or the other. You cannot do both, not within a split second of each other. Either you're going to have a breakdown, or you're going to go to this stoic place and be completely overwhelmed. But you can't sob and then look out into the middle distance a second later, having just started breaking down. That didn't sell it for me. I do want to share some positives as well, because I feel like I'm being particularly critical with this review. Like I said, Desmonda is a fantastic singer, and her delivery of Run Along Joe was so perfect, if not for the fact that it was in the wrong place in the show. Carly Stenson, also beautiful when she sings. I love the way that her voice has matured since I've last heard it. And I thought that even though her characterization was a little static and didn't really have much of an arc, the one note that she did give us was very beautifully characterized. Jonathan Bentley and Adam Rhys-Charles played Pruitt and Warden, respectively. I did enjoy their performances. Like I said, I wanted more sort of, whether it's light and shade, whether it's just trajectory from them, but both of them did sing very beautifully. Now, there's three standout performances I really want to highlight here. The first, and perhaps the most impressive to me, was Johnny Amy's, who is playing Maggio. Now, this is a really great part. I believe Frank Sinatra played this part originally in the film, but the material can really let an actor shine. And especially in this new version of the show, where everyone's a little brooding and a little bit intense, Maggio, for being more of a clown and for making jokes and for having a very different personality to everyone else around him, he really stands out. Johnny was fantastic. It was so well characterized. He was funny, he was engaging. He gets this phenomenal acting number in the second act. We got to see two really different sides of this character. He had a real arc, and so that was a really satisfying performance to watch. I thought he was fantastic. Another really strong performance was Alan Turkington, who played the captain. He played Captain Holmes. Now, I knew that he was in this show, and I had worked out who was playing which roles, but for some reason I had forgotten he wasn't playing Warden, the older love interest, until he came on and started being gruff and obnoxious as the captain, because I think Alan Turkington could absolutely still play the older love interest, and maybe he should have done. Perhaps he should. I think he could still be cast in one of those roles, and I think it's too soon in his career for us to write him off as the old, obnoxious, emotionally unavailable, cheating husband. And he was great in that role, if perhaps maybe not obnoxious enough. He was maybe easier to understand and to empathize with, and as great as that was for humanizing that character, I feel like it's important for us to root for the affair that's happening, that we really aren't on his side. Finally, I want to talk to you about Eve Polycarpou. Now, Eve Polycarpou is a standout, whatever cast she is in. She is a fantastic performer. She has so much presence. She's just a brilliant, brilliant actress. She played Mrs. Kipfer, and she gets a little more material with this version than she did in the original. This is perhaps one of the only ways in which I prefer this version of the show, because they've expanded on her character. Now, she plays a local madam whose business has boomed since the arrival of all of these soldiers to Hawaii. One of my favourite scenes in the show was a meeting in a hotel reception between her and Alan Turkington's character, Captain Holmes, where he is trying to negotiate something with her to try and manipulate Pruitt into joining the boxing squad, because that's literally all he cares about, even though we're in a war. Come on, man. And she makes these allusions to their past relationship and knowing him from before, and we kind of understand how much power she has over all of the local infrastructure just because she controls access to the prostitutes. It's a really damning indictment of the US military circa the Second World War, but nothing that really surprised me. But like I said, Eve was fantastic. The way she had this convivial customer service that could switch on a dime when she started extorting people for money, and her interactions with Desmonda as Lorene, where she was maternal and caring towards her, but still very strict and obstinate. Unsurprisingly, I enjoyed her performance very much. So I do feel like The Boys of 41 is a highlight moment in this show, and for this particular production I feel like it's what it's all been leading towards. I feel like it's definitely what they've framed everything else around. But like I said, it's what happens after that number where it seems to have been completely inconsequential, because we don't learn that any of the soldiers actually died in the explosion that we're seeing during that number. That makes the whole thing feel a little pointless. But during that number, it feels like a highlight point in the show, if that makes sense. So who would I recommend this production to? Well, it's definitely no longer the big sweeping romance that it was. It has a lot of similarities to Miss Saigon because it is still a romance with all of these political and military goings on as the backdrop. So if you're a really big fan of Miss Saigon and shows like that, then perhaps you'll still find a lot to enjoy about this. It is still very emotive and very passionate, and it pulls on your heartstrings in this very obvious way when we're talking about these war stories. I don't really love a lot of war-based media. I don't go and watch war films generally. I have no issue with it traditionally in musical theatre, but perhaps if you're someone who watches a lot of war movies, then you might enjoy this. But those have been my thoughts on From Here to Eternity at the Charing Cross Theatre. Let me know your thoughts if you have been to see this production already, particularly if you're someone who also saw the original. How do you think this new staging of the show compares? And I do think that is a fair question to ask, because this is a revival and this is the new script of the show. It has been rewritten by the creatives for this version, and I do mourn a lot of what was in that original production of the show. But perhaps other people have a different opinion. So like I said, if you have seen this version, let us know your thoughts in the comment section down below. Thank you for watching today's video. I hope you enjoyed. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my Stagey YouTube channel for plenty more content just like this coming very soon, including other reviews of new shows. Also, don't forget you can use the link in the description down below to sign up for Show Score, where not only will you see all of the reviews I have written for different websites, but you will also be able to review this production for yourself. How exciting. Finally, if you really enjoyed today's video, remember you can use the super thanks button below my face to give me a stagey tip. That very much helps me as a content creator. Or you can go to patreon.com/Mickey Jo Theatre for some exclusive photo and video content. I hope that everyone is staying safe and that you have a stagey day.
For 10 more seconds, I'm Mickey Jo Theatre. Oh my god, hey, thanks for watching, have a stagey day. Subscribe!